Norwich City reached the playoffs last season before losing in the semi-final to Leeds United after a showing of little attacking ambition in the home first leg at Carrow Road and not much in the way of anything really in the way of the second leg where they were defeated comprehensively. So optimism was quite low heading back from Elland Road among Norwich City fans. It very much felt like David Wagner's time was up, but there's now some optimism that the club's going into the long-term future under sporting director Ben Knapper and even under shareholder Mark Attanasio with a little bit of a plan and something to move forward with, because while Norwich City did make the top six last season under David Wagner, it always felt like if they had by some miracle got into the Premier League, they'd have none of the foundations required to stay there, and they'd have finished in the bottom three, having finished bottom in their last two seasons at that level. So enthusiasm for a return to the Premier League seems to me from the outside to be actually, in terms of the short term, not as high as it might be for other teams, because there seems to be a feeling among the Yellow Army that they need to put some foundations in place in order to be ready to compete at that level. They're hoping to put those foundations in place under Johannes Hoff Thorup, who has some excellent reviews in Scandinavia. So can he be the man to take Norwich City back on this long-term plan to the Premier League and to stable Premier League future? Well, that's the big question. Plenty to discuss on this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to the latest EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive, one of 72 we're doing across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. The full set for League Two uploaded to YouTube and to Spotify, a few for League One as well, so get yourself subscribed. Once you're done with this episode, for now, I'm delighted to be joined by Connor Southwell from the PinkUn.com and a Norwich City journalist and fan, of course. Connor, thank you so much for joining me. Where do patience and ambition meet at Carrow Road?
Oh, well, thanks for having me first and foremost. It's always lovely to chat to you, Gab. Yeah, that's a hell of a question to start. It's a really interesting one. And it almost feels like Norwich have gone back in time with that, to be honest, back to 2017, back to the reset that happened then. It's almost been almost putting it back into gear almost is kind of what it's felt like this summer. I think it's a really interesting question because you're right, there is a balance that needs to be struck between that. And I think you can have ambition and recognise that along that path, and it is going to be a path for Norwich City, and it's probably going to be a longer journey maybe than what they've tried to do over the last couple of years. That means I think you can be patient but ambitious, but you have to get a few things right along the way. You have to get your messaging right, and that's from people at the top, kind of documenting and communicating what the vision is, what the route is, and almost bringing people on that journey with you. So I think that's key. And then it's about kind of structures on the pitch, isn't it? A clear style, seeing progress in that style. I mean, I know a lot of people talk about year two under Daniel Farke, but year one was quite stodgy, and it was almost him building almost like the foundations of his style of play, and it was quite clunky. Norwich finished in the bottom half of the Championship before then going on to do what they did, and that was even after they sold the likes of Josh Murphy and Nelson Oliveira and people who had scored goals for them. So
James I can't believe you didn't mention James Maddison there, Connor.
James Maddison as well, of course. So I think it's a similar route. So Norwich fans have been on it, but it does feel like probably the base this time around for Johannes Hoff Thorup and Ben Knapper is probably slightly higher than it was in 2017 because of what you documented there. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but it's a balance that Norwich City are going to have to get right this season, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's one thing to say we want to rebuild, but also you've got to bear in mind that Norwich City are one of the biggest clubs in the Championship. Besides, one of the two very biggest. But it's and I think you're entitled to be a little bit ambitious, but at the same time, you want to develop some players that can grow within this league. Johannes Hoff Thorup, Connor, talk to me about the appointment. Presumably, you're quite excited.
Yeah, really interesting one. I think you look at kind of the long list of Norwich City managers and the ones that have been successful as a general rule of thumb, whether this means anything or not, historically has been the ones who are probably little known when they came into the role. Alex Neil, Daniel Farke, Paul Lambert, maybe to a lesser extent. He obviously had an EFL career before he came to Norwich. Mike Walker, if you want to go back even further, there we could keep going back and back and back. But it's a really interesting appointment. I think it's one that's been driven heavily on data. It's one that they feel aligns with the vision that Ben Knapper wants to implement, and that is centered around a few things really. And I think it's quite interesting when you look at the profile of managers that they ended up with. And I think this is interesting context, because the three that they kind of had that were on the short list, you look at it, was Will Still, who obviously had the season with Reims in France. It was Pascal Janssen, who'd been at AZ Alkmaar, and it was Johannes Hoff Thorup. So you look at those coaches and they all have lots of things in common, maybe Still to a lesser extent, but that was a slightly different experience for him because he was in Ligue 1 with a club with pretty limited resource, or maybe didn't see the playing style aspect with him, but we did in glimpses. I think they all had a progressive play style as a general rule of thumb. They all had a really good track record with graduating young talent. And then the one that I think has been slightly missed actually in sort of discourse and conversations around this, they're all managers who have kind of outperformed the resources that they've had at various levels. They all had obviously young teams as well. And I think Johannes Hoff Thorup's really interesting because you look at his numbers, and this is probably more a Nordsjælland thing than it is his thing, but he's come through the system. So the two have to dance, of course, but he is highest regarded in Europe in terms of playing young players, regularly competed during his time as first team manager at Nordsjælland with some really big beasts in that Danish league for titles and whatnot. Never won one, but was in that competition. So that sort of ticks the performing beyond the means that they had, and then equally obviously that progressive play style, which I think has been really interesting, that we've tried to delve into, and it's always difficult to do that when you don't know too much about the league that you're going into. So, and I guess all of that illustrates the point that probably we started with. Really, these things, when you bring a manager in from a league like that, takes time because there's an adaptation process. They need to tweak what they do. You look at the league season that he was coaching in last year, it was I think 32 games. This year it's 46. That's quite a big rise. You don't get as much time on the training pitch. You don't get as much contact time with the players to try and implement what you want to do. So yeah, he comes with really rave reviews. Norwich have done a big body of work on him. They've been speaking to his representatives since January. This has been a really long process. It was a really big body of work. It was thorough, and they've ended up with Thorup as the man that they think is best placed to take them on the next stage of their journey under Ben Knapper, and that's going to be radically different, I think, to what the last 2 years to 18 months have looked like at Carrow Road.
Early impressions of Ben Knapper, Connor?
Quite impressed, actually. Quite impressed. I think the limited amounts that he has spoken has been, he's been impressive. He has resolved, I think, and you might have seen this, but there's been a bit of a contractual issue with a young striker, Cannabo, who's very highly rated at Norwich City, has been for a long period of time. They've had him in their academy for a long period of time. Originally, I think he came from Luton, but I might need to double check that. But a really young striker who's out of contract this summer. They had a similar situation 12 months ago with Alex Matos, who obviously moved to Chelsea and then went on or spent the second half of the season on loan at Huddersfield. He was going to, and those two are very close. Abo was very frustrated about pathways, very frustrated about sort of a lack of plan to his overall development. He was going to leave the club. All of the noises as late as May really were that he was going to leave the club, and there was very little that anyone could do to change his mind. And we sat here and a few days ago he was announced as having signed a new 3-year deal. So I think that is a personal triumph for Ben Knapper and his vision, and being able to sell that to players and get their trust and belief in it. But equally, I think some of the decisions that he's taken, they've been quite interesting. They've been quite data led, and I think what we've seen from him is probably slightly different from Stuart Webber, really, in that he's not someone who wants to thrust himself into the spotlight. He's not someone that's brash and reactive. He's not someone that's confrontational. He's quite reserved. He's quite happy to sit and absorb, as we saw probably with the managerial decision. He came in November when Norwich were in 17th, and it was a real low point. Everyone and their and their parents and their dogs were all screaming for David Wagner to be relieved of his duties at that stage. He wasn't. Norwich did actually have an upturn in form in the second half of the season, but clearly I think everyone could see the way the wind was blowing by the end. But that was, again, a thorough sort of process that he's led since January, ongoing with obviously an uplift in form. So both of those things happened at once. So yeah, I think for considering it's his first role, and obviously we're in his first proper transfer window now, his first signing is a Panamanian international who's playing in Bulgaria. I mean, that's,
I love that.
Yeah, it's about as niche as you can get, really. But yeah, I think it's hard not to have listened to him speak, and more so his actions, I think,
Yes,
so far, particularly this summer, where it feels like he's been able to sort of roll his sleeves up and really implement what he wants to implement. I think it's hard, sitting here on the 5th of July, not to be quite excited, but also quite intrigued by what he's trying to do at Norwich City.
Certainly. From an ownership point of view, Connor, there's been, I think for about a year or so now, there's been a feeling that a changing of the guard is coming in terms of the majority stakes, because Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones been incredible custodians for Norwich City Football Club. I'm sure you'll agree. At the same time, they don't really have the resources now to fund the club in its future endeavours for where it wants to go, really. But you've got Mark and Mike Atanasio coming in. Do you like the way that they've opened up? I think they spoke to Talk Norwich City very early on in their sort of association with the club. Do you feel like these are going to be the right people to take the club forward?
Yeah, again, I think there is a cautious optimism around it. I get a sense from some fans that I speak to, and again, it's always hard to gauge in terms of percentages, but there is definitely a feeling amongst some of them, however big you want to categorize that, that maybe things haven't moved quicker to allow him almost to take power. But I actually think the process that has been led is quite astute, and you will have seen it with goodness knows how many EFL clubs now. There's so many active situations where the wrong person has been able to waltz and have too much power too quickly and doesn't necessarily use that power in the right way. So I think this cautious kind of step-by-step approach is good, but equally for Mark as well, because he's somebody that, I think he'd be probably the first to admit this, had no real interest in football or knowledge of football stepping into it. And we know it's a difficult world. So I think if you've got the opportunity to learn off two people who have been in the business for, 25 years more, it's an opportunity that you take. And obviously gradually I think we can all see where it's heading, and let's be honest about it. Delia and Michael are getting no younger, aren't getting any younger as well. So there has to be kind of this contingency and look to the future. And I think it's been clever how they've done it. It's clearly difficult because when you've got this situation, Mark Atanasio probably isn't going to put in maybe as much money as people would like him to put in. I know there's been a little bit of support to get that Jose Cordoba deal over the line from his group as well. So I think there has been little signs, and he's taken on a big portion of kind of the debt that Norwich City had last season, and obviously they're going to have to sell players this summer to try and fill a whole post parachute payments. But I think he's an impressive individual. We spoke to him at the AGM. I think there's clearly someone who's worked in sport for a long time and understands it, even if that isn't football, but there are some sort of crossovers there. So I think we're all intrigued to kind of see what that looks like moving forwards, and how quickly maybe that process goes. I think there was a feeling, certainly I was getting whispers in sort of late last year, that if Norwich City remained in the Championship, it might have to be sped up. That hasn't happened as of yet. It's just a case of kind of waiting and seeing what unfolds here. Now I think they've got this agreement until January 2026, I think. So we've got a year or so left of it. Whether anything progresses or not, we'll see. But I think there is cautious optimism now for all of the elements that we've just mapped out. Really, the ownership element, even though there's a slight underpin of frustration there, the sporting director and the head coach, because there does now feel like there is at least some strategy and some alignment that fans can look to and connect with a little bit, because that's been really lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I kind of agree with you about not rushing things. I think allowing things to sort of take a more organic course in terms of the changing of hands. I think that makes sense. Now I've not had the chance to look at what Johannes Hoff Thorup's preferred formation has been at previous clubs. I don't know if you've got any insight on that, but if I look at the squad at the moment, I think for a progressive style, the squad suits itself better to 4-3-3 than maybe to 4-2-3-1. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yes, I think so. I think it's clear that it's a squad that needs work. And again, we probably go back to the first question, really, because Norwich want to move it and gear it towards younger players, and you've still got a lot of players who are 30 or over in that squad. I think there was 7 last time I counted. They've obviously done some work in that area with some players they've released, Danny Bart and Ben Gibson, but you still got Ashley Barnes on the books, Shane Duffy on the books, Grant Hanley, Onel Hernandez. Christian Fashnacht is over 30 as well. So getting rid of all of those in one window is obviously really dangerous and probably downplays the role that experience and know-how has. But yeah, it does feel like a squad that does need some work. And if I'm being completely honest, sat here on the 5th of July as we are, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a little bit more work done at this stage. I think we're probably seeing it's a slightly slower transfer market than we would have expected, and that's probably on ins and outs as well. I probably expected to see a little bit more movement, a little bit quicker than we have done, but I guess that's probably the same for every club, right? And that's why the window exists, because you've got a certain period of time. So certainly not panicking, but probably a bit sort of sat here like, oh, okay, well, I probably expected more to be done at this stage. But, you know, you get 2 in the next week, and people's views change, don't they?
They certainly do. Let's have a look at the goalkeeping situation then. You've got Angus Gunn there. You've got George Long there, who's formerly of Millwall. Gunn's obviously got a strong family connection to the club. And you've got Daniel Barden in there as well. Would you be expecting Angus Gunn to be your number one?
Providing he sticks around, yeah, absolutely. Again, he's someone that's just entering the final 12 months of his deal. He had a really good season last year. I thought one of the better, certainly, shot stoppers in the league. Whether you want to stretch that out to goalkeepers, and I probably would. I think he statistically ranked amongst some of the best. Maybe didn't have the best Euros that he would have wanted. That maybe would have propelled him and added fuel to maybe some of the performances last season that maybe would have attracted attention from elsewhere. We'll see. But yeah, for me, I think he's pretty comfortably Norwich's number one. I think for me, it would be a really important bit of business if they could get him tied down to a pretty long-term deal. It would be a real statement of intent for me. And I think he's probably deserving of that. Again, the issue they've got is probably the financial realities of it, because he's someone that they signed as a Premier League club, and they're now in the Championship post-parachute payments. And I think we can all do the maths and understand why that could potentially be difficult. But he's such a talented goalkeeper. I think he's really been, and it's quite rare, certainly in recent years. And it was, he signed for Norwich in a summer transfer window that isn't remembered fondly at all. The likes of Crystal Solis and others came in that window and had very limited success, but he's been really successful. And it's probably worked for both parties, because he joined Norwich off the back of that 9-0 defeat to Leicester as a Southampton player, where I think rather unfairly he was scapegoated, never really played a minute again for the football club. Confidence was shattered. He had loan spells at Stoke, which were a little bit mixed, and I know Stoke fans aren't that hot on him. So he came to Norwich probably needing to find his rhythm again, find his confidence again. I think he's absolutely done that. And of course, the context of it, he signed when Tim Krul was not untouchable, but was definitely number one. And he's won that race. Tim Krul obviously moved on. So yeah, it does feel like his position if he wants it. But I think Norwich have got to do a bit of work this summer on his contract to try and get him to stick around. And if not, then you run the risk of losing him on a free. And I think that would be not great, I think, of a situation given his age profile.
Are you surprised that it's got to this situation from a contractual point of view, Connor? Because Angus Gunn, I wouldn't look at Angus Gunn as a goalkeeper who's done brilliantly elsewhere from Norwich. Probably his best seasons in his career. You think of probably the 17-18 season at Norwich that you mentioned, Farke's first season. And then he went and maybe didn't quite work out from at different clubs. And I'm just wondering, given, I don't know if I should be putting too much weight on the family stuff, and, he is his own man and everything. He's not his dad. But I'm almost wondering, is there, a possibility for him to really find a home at Norwich City and actually build something rather than go and maybe risk not having to prove yourself all over again?
Yeah, definitely. I think, if Angus wanted it, I think absolutely he could be Norwich City's goalkeeper for the next 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, he's what, 27, 28? He's not old. That's a position that he could have and really go on and rack up an incredible number of games if he really wanted to. He surpassed 100 already this season, and like you said, the family connection, I think everyone would like to see that. And there is something, that I'm sure from a Norwich fan perspective, there is something really nice about seeing a Gunn in goal. It just kind of feels right more than anything else. I think there is that natural connection between him and the supporters, and the fact that he's grown up around the club all his life. But I still think there's probably a part of him, and I've interviewed Angus a few times, and it's always difficult to get a sense of a human being, but I've just always sensed this sort of nagging want to go and prove himself a little bit higher. And obviously the dream is that you can do that with Norwich, and that almost he doesn't need to then go and do it elsewhere. But I think he was probably so, not tarnished, that's unfair, but probably feels like there was so much left to prove after what happened at Southampton in the Premier League. That was his big move. There were actually some positive signs when he first joined the club for what was it, £10 million. It was a really big fee that he went for in goalkeeping terms. And he's a really talented goalkeeper. I'm actually probably surprised there's not been a little bit more noise around him at this stage in terms of outgoing Scotland's number one as well now, of course, and pretty convincingly. So I think there is probably a battle for him. Do you stay and almost become a legend, which is what he's got the potential to do? Or do you go and almost try and answer that nagging doubt in your head of, I think I could do this at a higher level? It's a difficult one. And I guess it probably comes down to what he wants. But, he's a fantastic goalkeeper. And I think if he did go on and got a Premier League move or got a move to one of the two giants in Scotland, I think Norwich fans would probably look at it and go, do you know what? That's a move that worked for everybody. It worked for Norwich. He got a fantastic goalkeeper, but it also worked for Angus as well, because he's been given a platform to almost not rehabilitate his career. That's a bit strong, but definitely rebuild it after probably some unfair circumstances, I would say. But yeah, I'd be gutted, I think, if he left Norwich City, because, as I said, the opportunity that he's got here to create something for himself. You mention it and everyone feels it. It's difficult when your dad is a legend and and you're known as Brian's son. He's got an opportunity to almost be his own man and create his own path at Norwich City, and that would be really lovely. But equally, I can understand why that might feel like a little bit of a burden.
Interesting. So we'll have to see. Do you think that you would, if, let's say, Angus Gunn does leave, do you think you'd trust George Long as the number one, or do you think you'd bring in another goalkeeper?
I think they'd bring in another goalkeeper. I think George Long, for the role that he had at Norwich, has done that pretty well. There's some good cup performances, but I think in terms of, there's been some really shaky moments in the Championship. I think they probably want someone a little bit younger, would be my feeling. Okay. So yeah, I think they'd probably go into the market if that situation panned out.
Right. Okay. So right back situation. Now, what my sort of first thought about this, Connor, from the outside is, I think with Jack Stacey, you've got someone who will be a 6 or 7 out of 10 next season. Whereas I think Callum Fisher is someone who could struggle potentially because he's unproven, but he could also be the next Max Aaron. So you sort of don't know which way he's going to go. But do you see a world where Callum Fisher takes that right back spot?
Yes and no. I think I'd quite like to see Kellen go out on loan, but for the reasons almost that you've documented. I think there's a good player in there, and I think for this stage of his development, you kind of have to weigh it up. Do you want him being in your squad as sort of a number two and almost not really getting much game time, which I don't think we probably would expect him to do? And again, you have to weigh that up between, is it worth him getting 8 to 10 games at Norwich, or is it worth him actually going and getting a full season at a League One club or elsewhere, League Two or whatever? And I feel like after having a year of that already at Norwich, it would probably be more beneficial now for him to go out and get some football. I think there's some interesting questions around Jack Stacey and whether he is the type of player that will suit what Johannes Hoff Thorup wants his team to be, very possession heavy, and I have a little some examples and not always, because I think managers can tweak, but certainly on the left side he likes to invert. The right side at Northland he played with a little bit more of a conventional sort of attacking right back, and that would suit Jack Stacey. But if it is possession based, I just wonder if there's the technical base there to go and almost make the most of with Jack Stacey. But he's a very good runner and like you said, very consistent. I think the reality is, would they be able to get someone better at this stage? Probably not. So my feeling is it would be Jack Stacey, but I'd probably like to see Norwich, if they could, and if the resources allowed, dip into the loan market and try and provide a little bit of competition that way. So that way you let Fisher out on loan and get a proper season of development. You get someone to really push Stacey as well. That would kind of be my perfect scenario, I think. But I think as a position, Jack Stacey for me was one of Norwich's most consistent performers last year. There's still issues. I think crossing wise, we'd like to see him be a little bit more consistent with that. But again, in the possession based side, that might not be as much of a priority as perhaps it was under David Wagner. So lots of question marks around that right back side. But I personally would be shocked if we got to the opening day of the season and it wasn't Jack Stacey starting there, to be honest.
Okay. We'll see how that one develops. Hopefully, Callum Fisher can get some first team football next season either way. But left back, it's interesting you mentioned that he likes the left back to invert, isn't it? Because the sort of common consensus among Norwich fans last season was that Jakob Sorensen isn't a left back, but he's definitely played at left back, I'm sure, more than he has in midfield. And I'm wondering if it might actually suit him more if the role is about inverting into midfield as opposed to being more of a conventional left back, which probably doesn't suit him so much.
Yeah, and that's a similar thought process that I've had actually ever since he signed his contract and Thorup got mentioned. It's slightly different because he inverted his left. It might be slightly different at Norwich, but at Nordsjælland he inverted his left back to almost create a back three in build up. So he's almost becoming a third centre back, which again is a role that Jakob Sorensen has done. So I could see a world where he does get pushed into that position. I think he has played there before. He played there a little bit in Daniel Farke's second title-winning season. Norwich had a bit of an issue with progressing the ball on that side when he played there because he's naturally right-footed, and so they lost sort of some of the ball progression down that side, and that's why they brought in Dimi Yanulis ultimately to try and help that. And I remember speaking to Stuart Webber, and he said, in almost that Norwich went from a good or a challenger for championship promotion that year to an almost cert because they brought in Dimi Yanulis and had natural width and whatnot. So I think it's clear they've lost McCallum, they've lost Yanulis. The only options they have at this moment in time in terms of naturally is a young player called Guilherme Montoya, who they signed from Benfica on a free transfer last season. He's the only sort of left back in at the moment. I've watched him play a couple of times, and again, very attack orientated, but I think there's some serious questions there in terms of defensively. Or you've got Jakob Sorensen, as we discussed, and even Kenny McLean, who's played there on occasion as a makeshift. But again, we're really getting into sort of clutching at straws there. So this is a position for me where Norwich need at least one, probably two options. And I think they'll have a look at Montoya in pre-season and see how he gets on, and that's going to be an interesting one. But yeah, this is probably one that I think most Norwich fans are looking at as saying this is the most pressing area of the pitch that they need to find some solutions to after losing what was two pretty good fullbacks at this level, I would say.
So if you were to play Jakob Sorensen at left back, midfield balance or defensive balance in midfield wouldn't be quite as big a priority because Sorensen's a steady operator. Whereas with Montoya, I think that would affect the midfield because you would need one of your midfielders to be comfortable dropping into centre half. So especially if Stacey or whoever you got at right back goes forward a lot as well, you basically need another midfielder to basically drop in and be a third centre half. And I'm wondering if Kenny McLean can do that job because he's actually filled in at centre half as well at times last season. So could that work quite nicely?
Yeah, I think so. And like you say, I think the benefits of that almost was Norwich, had real benefits in terms of their ball progression that they didn't really have otherwise when he played as a centre-back. And actually the reason that David Wagner often gave for playing him as a centre-back was because of his qualities on the ball and how it allowed Norwich almost to step up the pitch and keep possession a little bit better. And we saw it for periods in games that Norwich were expected to dominate really in terms of possession. Often he would certainly, there was a period of the season where he would drop Kenny McLean in as a solution rather than playing someone like Danny Bart, who really struggled in terms of ball progression, for instance. So I think it is interesting. It's good to have so many options. I think, and that's why I think probably leaning towards maybe, and Norwich have been linked with Martin Fraser, who Thorup had at Nordsjælland. And that would make sense because it does feel like quite a specific role. And so it feels like from a recruitment perspective, it would be good to get someone who's kind of used to doing that already. And I think Sorensen is really interesting, but there is clearly an element of coaching here that needs to take place as well, because that's not a natural thing. And actually we saw, one of the sort of areas that David Wagner highlighted when they were in that really bad way in the autumn was the fact that both their fullbacks were so high that it was just leaving them open to transitional opportunity. So you have to get that balance right. And in the end, they kind of sorted it out by letting Stacey go and having, Yanulis stay back or vice versa. So it will be interesting to see how Thorup approaches that because, and again, this probably sort of moves us and segues us into midfield, but they don't really have a natural six option, I would say, a natural defensive midfield option.
I actually think could Liam Gibbs be that? Because I know David
Yeah,
Wagner used him as
yeah,
a number 10, but he's clearly not a 10.
he's not.
I'm
No.
I'm sure I remember watching him under Dean Smith, where
Yeah,
he played a bit. Might have played as a 6, or certainly a similar sort of role.
yeah.
He actually popped the ball back quite nicely. So could Liam Gibbs be a number 6?
Yeah, absolutely. And last year again, we talk about development and pathways, and I think this was often one that was put by Norwich fans sort of against David Wagner. I mean, he tried to play Liam Gibson a 9 at points, and it was baffling, frankly. And because we saw his best football come under Dean Smith in a deeper line midfield role where he could get on the ball and affect games. And I know that when he joined Norwich from Ipswich, where he was a 10, they did a lot of work with him on that 6 role at academy level to kind of introduce him to that position and some of the positions that he'd have to take up, and obviously some of the additional scanning and whatnot that you have to do in that particular area. So it did feel like last year he'd almost lost a year of development, really, because he was kind of being put all over the place in positions that he just wasn't. So, yeah, I think there's definitely merit to that suggestion. If they can unlock Liam Gibbs in that sense, I think you have got somebody who can do that job. Certainly on the ball. I think I'd like to see a little bit more from him off the ball to back up that he can do what Norwich would need to do in that area. But given that Thorup wants to play this possession-centric style, I don't think it's the worst solution in the world. And it's obviously a player who went from being Young Player of the Year at Norwich City to, as we said, I don't even know what happened last season, but it wasn't beneficial for his development. So yeah, I think you're right there. Actually, if they can unlock Liam Gibbs, then maybe that is a solution to the number 6 debate.
Yeah, for sure. Centre backs then, Connor. You've got a kind of a mix of centre backs where you've got Grant Hanley and Shane Duffy, who are probably they're established Championship centre halves, but they are coming towards the end of their careers. You got Tompkinson and Warner, who are right at the start of their careers, and you've got Jose Cordoba, who, like you said, you recruited, who's a Panamanian defender that's unproven in English football, if you want to sort of put a marker on that. So I think Cordoba looks like a really exciting signing to start with, and I'm sure I saw somewhere that the data ranked him on a similar level to Taylor Harwood-Bellis, who was at centre half at Burnley. So are you excited by the Cordoba edition?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, goes back again right to the start of this conversation, a signing that was done on data and plucking a Panamanian international out of Bulgaria. It's not what Championship teams do conventionally, really. And I think the fact that Norwich have gone and put a reported £3 million down to sign him. I mean, this is not a Norwich side that's flush with cash or with parachute payments. That is a big commitment, and as I said, supported by the ownership group, like we discussed. So this does feel like a real investment because of the profile that he is, and because of the potential that they feel they can get out of him, and the fact that they feel that he is at an area and at a position where the data suggests that he was undervalued, really, in terms of the qualities that he has. So yeah, really exciting, and left-footed as well. And we all know that if you can get one, polish them and make them better, then the value that you can get from a left-footed centre-back these days is remarkable. It's one of the most sort of sought-after positions that you can have. So I think those elements as well. So all of those kind of point to him being the starting option on the left side, particularly given, as we've discussed, the want to play possession-based football, building up from deep. I think his qualities lend itself to that. The more interesting debate for me is on the right, because, and you mapped it out there, you've got two really experienced options in Shane Duffy, who, by his own admission, probably had a really mixed year. Obviously had some off-field issues towards the end of the season, which, again, how much impact that has, I don't know. Grant Hanley, who's obviously had a very serious injury, Achilles injury, and a lot of doubt over kind of the level that he could reach. But I thought he actually produced some very good performances in the Euros, which were encouraging, because you have an Achilles injury like that, and people were saying to me, if you have this injury, it's quite hard to get back up to the level that you were hitting pre-injury, and particularly at the age he is, and all of those elements. 80% is kind of the one that was being touted. If he gets to 80% of where he was, he'd be quite lucky. And actually the performances at the Euros looked like kind of vintage Grant Hanley, but they were in certain conditions. They were quite rough and tumble games. So I think there is a real question mark around him, final year of his contract as well. And then you've almost got the young guys beneath him. You mapped it out. Tompkinson, I think, is really interesting. Brad Hills, of course, coming back from a really successful loan at Accrington. Jaden Warner, who broke into made his senior debut last year, but didn't have the best loan at Notts County. Emmanuel Adebayoga as well, who was on loan at Walsall.
Of course, I really liked him at Walsall, actually. Yeah, he had a great time there, yeah.
Exactly. So there's almost this young cohort of centre backs, which, you know, I think if you're Norwich City, if you're Ben Knapper, if you're Johannes Hoff Thorup, you're thinking, blimey, you know, there's a lot of talent in those defensive ranks that you want to push through. But equally, you've got Shane Duffy and Grant Hanley, and almost the experience, the authority that they command in the dressing room. You sort of have to wait up, don't you? Because those guys can be so pivotal for you in terms of the belief in that project and that balance between patience and ambition from a playing style perspective. These are the guys that you almost want to buy in. But equally, they've got lots of young talent there. So I think this is a really interesting debate. I think it's one that is going to rumble on throughout pre-season. You know, I'd love to see Brad Hills get an opportunity after what he did at Accrington last year. I think that, you know, you're probably in a better place to talk about it than me, but I watched him play against Sutton, and I probably didn't see enough of his ball playing qualities to really assess him. But certainly physically, he's you know, he's a man, isn't he? In terms of physically, he's a big guy, likes to compete, and has just been in League Two, so we'll know what that's like.
I think can I just come on to the centre back position, Connor? I think with those four players, Adeboyega, Tompkinson, Warner, and Hills, the slight dilemma that Norwich have got is that none of them are proven above League Two. So if one of them had just had an amazing loan in League One, I think we'd not be hesitating in saying, yeah, they could be right in the contention to start, or at least be, you know, in the matchday squad and that sort of, you know, regularly. But because it's League Two, there's a bit more of a jump for them. And so I think ideally for each of those, it might be a loan to League One for next season. But it's like you almost want to assess them in pre-season and see, could one of them be ready to at least come into that conversation?
Yeah, exactly that. And, you know, I remember speaking to one of the Accrington guys when I went to watch Brad Hills, and it was almost saying that, you know, pre maybe the final portion of the season where I think it was a bit difficult for Accrington generally as a team, Brad Hills was probably one of the standout performers in League Two. And I remember someone at some stage saying that he was kind of around Christmas time that he was boasting kind of player data that League One players would kind of produce. So again, how much you can lean into this stuff, I don't know. And obviously the second half of the season was tougher for him. He made quite a bad mistake actually in the game that I watched him play. But I think he's probably the one that Norwich fans are looking at, if I'm honest. But I don't think you can write Jonathan Tompkinson off. You know, certainly the noises in March time was that Hills and Tompkinson were the two that they were looking at most seriously in terms of first team option. But again, that's subsequently Adeboyega's gone out and had a really good loan at Walsall, so that could bring him into the conversation. Jaden Warner could come back and really impress, new manager and whatnot. So I think you're right. It's nice to have kind of this pool of talent that they've got in defensive areas, but I'm with you. I think we've probably most of them. It feels like it probably needs another loan at League One, almost similar to what Abu Kamara did at this year, to then get them in a position next summer where, okay, they haven't got Grant Hanley. Shane Duffy might be in a different situation. Obviously, he'd be then coming up to the final year of his contract, year older. That probably feels like a better situation for maybe them to then come into the first team. This, as you said, feels like a little bit of a jump, but if one of them could do it to at least become part of the squad, I could probably foresee one of those four maybe being in and around it.
Yeah, well, hopefully they can, big pre-season for all of them, but hopefully either of them can make progress, whether that's with the squad or whether that's out on loan. Talk to me about I guess the big dilemma is you might want a technical six next season, whether that's Liam Gibbs, whether we think Kenny McLean can do that role. You've talked about Frazier coming in, but then you've also got Gabriel Sara and Marcelino Nunes. Now, obviously, Gabriel Sara is the big one that you want to build the team around if you're able to keep hold of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's... I mean, if Norwich managed to keep hold of Gabriel Sara, that would be quite something, really, for a player of his quality to still be playing Championship football. It would almost be a travesty because he's that good. I feel that he should be playing at a much higher level than he is at this moment in time. But I think we're in a really interesting place. I think we've all seen with the shenanigans in the Premier League and the PSR rules and the concerns around spending at the moment that there's probably not the same. Inflation probably is the right word in the market, and Norwich's valuation of Gabriel Sara will be high. And I don't think he's the type of player, you know, maybe dissimilarly to some of those who are tout with an exit this summer that will be kind of itching and almost being frustrated if he doesn't get an opportunity at a higher level. So I think there is probably a realistic, you know, possibility that he could be a Norwich player next season, which is mind-blowing, but equally absolutely magnificent. I think if you're Johannes Hoff Thorup, because to have a player like that who was recording numbers similar to what Dewsbury Hall was recording last year in terms of creatively, that's staggering. That lad's just gone to Chelsea, and whatever you think of that move, it's incredible. So I hope Norwich can keep him. I still really find it really difficult to fathom that they could, but yeah, there'd be obviously a much stronger team. But by the same token, there is obviously the realistic element that they are going to need to sell players this summer. And obviously, I guess the other two are John Rowe and Josh Sargent, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But at the moment, and certainly the noise is early summer, and whether that, I haven't checked in on this, so whether that's changed recently, was that he was the most likely of the three to stay. So we'll see. There's been lots of kind of rumours of interest from Roma. How serious or not that is, I think it's been quite difficult to pin down, and I don't know is the honest truth. But if that's the sort of club that he's being pitched at this stage, I think it feels quite difficult to imagine him remaining in the Championship and remaining at Norwich beyond the summer, certainly.
Yeah. Do you know what? It could be, Connor, that the trajectory that Gabriel Sara's on might be a little bit more rapid, maybe, to the trajectory that Norwich City are on as a club, because I think we're looking at Norwich City as at a time of steady growth, whereas Gabriel Sara he's in his mid-20s now, and he's going to feel like he deserves to be playing in the Premier League or possibly at even a big European club, and so. Yeah, I could understand if he felt like he wanted to move. How does Norwich City strike that balance then, Connor, in terms of the midfield, between having some having the right creativity you need for the style that Thorup wants to play, but also having a bit of a combative edge as well, and having a little bit of physicality there, and being able to win your battles?
This is a fascinating question. I'll tell you why it's fascinating, because Daniel Farke had a very similar thing when he came in. And there was almost a watershed moment in his first season. Norwich they went away to Millwall. We all know the environment. I think it was Neil Harris's Millwall, actually. And that is an incredibly difficult test, I think, regardless, even if you're a very good physical, direct team and capable of withstanding teams who are similar. That's a very difficult challenge. But for a team that was trying to play a very different way, with kind of a different outlook, really possession-based, and had a lot of technicians in it, they got beat 4-0 that day, and off the back of that, Farke's actions and Norwich's actions as a club was then to go and sign Grant Hanley from Newcastle to come in and offer them a little bit of experience at centre-back, but also it was to restore Alex Tettey as a defensive midfielder, and that was one of the best decisions that Daniel Farke made, and Tom Tribal came into that position as well during the next season, but having Tettey really shored it up and almost enabled them then to build or have a foundation to build that style upon. So I think there's absolutely merit to what you say, because you can go too far the other way, and if you don't understand the physicality, the power of the Championship and how intense it is and the rough and tumble of it, and you try and pack your midfield out of technicians, by and large, not always, because you can do it and teams have done it and had really good success, but I just think you do need that bit of bite in there. And I think actually probably since Ollie Skip left, Alex Tettey left in the same summer, Norwich haven't quite been able to add that in the same way. Kenny McLean's done a very noble job there, but he's not a ball winner. He's not somebody who is, a physical athlete in that sense. I think he's a very good footballer, and I think he's more of an 8 than a 6 in my view.
Okay, interesting.
So I just wonder whether that sort of thing will be in Norwich's mind. But obviously, the interesting aspect is that none of the current kind of hierarchy, obviously Thorup wasn't at the club, Knapper wasn't at the club when that Millwall situation happened, and the shift did need to be made, because I think at that stage there would have been serious questions about Daniel Farke and what he was trying to do. So it's funny how football works, but I think that should be a warning, really, in terms of anything that Johannes Hoff Thorup wants to do. But yeah, I think it's all about balance, and I think they will need physicality and they will need power in their midfield for sure. You always do at this level, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So maybe it'd be interesting to see whether Frazier, who you mentioned earlier, would be someone who'd be able to provide elements of both, because again, it's a really interesting balancing act. Talk to me about Marcelino Nunes, Connor, in the season that's ahead for him, and do you think that if Gabriel Sara were to go, he could actually take on more creative freedom, possibly?
Yeah, I hope so, because I really like him as a footballer, and I think actually certainly in 2024, since the start of it, I think there's a really good case, maybe not a strong case, but there's a good case that he was one of Norwich City's better performers in that run that got them into the top six, and actually him coming into the side enabled them to push Gabriel Sara a bit higher up the pitch and almost unlock him from a creativity point of view after what was it was a bit of a drought, but by his standards, but his performances weren't that bad. It's been overstated a little bit, I think, but Nunez came in alongside McLean and offered Norwich something real different. He was really good on the ball, very press resistant, just a really good footballer. I think if you like technicians, he's a footballer that you'd like to watch. He can take it on the half turn. He can take it in tight spaces. He can play a range of passes and score outrageous goals from outside the box. He's a really, really talented player. But I think for me, and I made this point to someone inside the club towards the end of the season, I think he's almost like bulked up a bit. His shoulders are broader. He's been able to sort of take on the demands of English football a little bit better than he had. And his was interesting because, and you mapped it out there, Gabriel Sara was a little bit of a slow burner actually when he arrived at Norwich. Was quite slow to begin with and then kind of exploded. I think Nunez came in, looked really impressive, then had a spell where he dipped off majorly, and then towards sort of the back end of last season kind of reached those levels that people thought he could do again. So yeah, it's really interesting. There's obviously a subplot going on. There's some interest in him from Turkey and Trabzonspor, and they would like to sign him this summer. I don't think he's a player that Norwich City would like to sell, but as we've mapped out financially, I think they're in a position where they do have to think about offers that come their way for certain players. So I think for the style that they want to play, he almost feels really suited to it, really geared to it. And I think another season in the Championship could really unlock him, if I'm honest, if Thorup could get him in the right position. So, yeah, I think you're right if Sara did go, but I think even if he didn't, I think there's a major role for him to play in this Norwich City side.
Yeah, let's hope that's going to be the case. So the right wing or right forward spot, if we're thinking 4-3-3, really interests me, Connor, because you've got Johnny Rowe there, who was sensational when fit last season, especially in the opening months of the campaign and in those East Anglian derbies. You got Christian Fashnat, who can put in a shift on the right as well, and is a pretty tidy footballer. And you got Abu Kamara, who's a bit of an inside forward, who had a really good loan at Portsmouth, who won the title in League One. And unlike the centre halves that we mentioned earlier in Adboyega, Tompkinson, Warner, and Hills, who have just been proven in League Two, and there's maybe a few more questions about them, Kamara's just done it in League One and he's won a title. So for me, that puts him in a really good position to try and compete for a place. But there's options there, and obviously Johnny Rowe is the star man if he stays.
Yeah, well, that's the key point. If he stays, I feel like he's probably the most likely one to go. If I'm honest, his age profile, what he did last season when he was fit, like you say, I also think from Norwich's perspective as well, probably the right time to cash in on him. If I'm honest, it feels like his value is where it is. He's got a year left on his deal. He's got an option on it, but I think at the moment it feels quite unlikely that he's going to sign a new one. So then you have to go for maximum value. I think there probably will be sufficient interest in him. So I would be quite surprised if he stayed at the club this summer. But hey, who knows? In transfer windows, it's never a given. So if it is the case and he does go, well, I'm not sure Norwich would dip into the market to go and sign a replacement because they've got Abu Kamara, and he's someone that I hear really positive noises about in terms of they want in and around the first team because of what he did at Portsmouth last year. And like you say, why wouldn't you? A player that goes and records the numbers that he did, he was a bit of a triple threat, wasn't he? Scored goals, created goals, was a ball carrier. I think all of those elements are something that you want. And it was interesting speaking to some guys at the Portsmouth end and how two elements really probably changed him, and that was getting him probably in inside positions a little bit more, but equally John Mousinho really standing up for him after he had a little bit of a period of criticism from supporters, and that can make or break a young player. That was his first loan as well. It's important to remember, and everyone talks about how difficult it is as a young player to go out on loan somewhere and really make that impact. So to play, I think, every game as he did for Portsmouth, to have the impact that he did, it's remarkable. And yeah, I think if you're Norwich City, particularly if you're a Norwich City that wants to put an emphasis on young talent, wants to get academy players through, sorry, but you have to find a place for Abu Kamara in your side if that is your goal and your objective. So yeah, I really want to see Abu Kamara in this team next season, and that probably means that John Rowe will go. But if that's the case, I think Norwich would wish John Rowe well. He's, as you said, academy product, did so well last season. 2 goals at Ipswich. That's enough to to leave him pretty well remembered in these parts for a long period of time, and conducted himself really well as well. But I know John is fiercely ambitious, and as he should be, because he's a brilliant talent. But Norwich shouldn't be fearful if that's the case this summer, I think.
Yeah, I think 10, 20 years ago, you'd be looking at a 21-year-old player and saying, you don't need to make your move yet, you've got time on your side, and you might move when you're 23, 24. But I think in the modern era of football, I think there's a massive clamour for youth, and youth gets valued really highly. I think because of that, I can see why there'd be interest in Johnny Rowe. And I can see, even though you could argue Gabriel Sara had the more consistent season last year because he wasn't so much, Johnny Rowe had a lot of those long times out with injury, but Rowe's got that high ceiling, I guess, that's going to be a massive attraction too.
And also, sorry, just to jump in there, but 2 points from an Norwich perspective as well. He massively outperformed his numbers last year in terms of expected goals. I think there's no guarantee that he will score what he scored last year, and it might just be that he's a very good finisher, and there were elements of that with certain finishers, but there's no guarantee that he would do that, and certainly the numbers and the data suggest he probably wouldn't. And also for me, and I'm being so critical here, but I'd like to see a little bit more from him creatively. I didn't feel that he produced enough. I think he got 1 or maybe 2 assists for Norwich last year, which player in that role I think I'd want to see a little bit more from. But chance creation wise, I don't think his numbers were exceptional either. So I think from a Norwich perspective, those 2 elements are probably an argument as to why now you maximise his value and almost cash in on him when his value's here instead of next summer, where they've probably activated an option and teams can smell that and he gets devalued in that sense, particularly if maybe he's failed to replicate what he did last season. So yeah, that's just maybe a different side of the argument, but I think it's an interesting one.
No, that's a fair point. So up top, again, a really competitive area there, Connor, because you've got, if we're saying it's going to be 4-3-3 rather, I mean, if he played 4-2-3-1, Ashley Barnes isn't going to play number 10 in a Thorup system, is he? So you've got basically 4 strikers, and all of them are in pretty good positions, because you've got Josh Sargent, who is amazing, probably his best Norwich City season yet, in terms of certainly when he got back from injury, he was amazing. You've got Ashley Barnes there, who's an experienced Championship centre forward. You got Adam Eder, who I think's had an amazing loan spell at Rangers. And you've got Ken Abbo, who is probably your brightest young prospect in terms of teenagers. So again, I think that makes it a really exciting situation up top. But I can't imagine that you're going to go into the start of the season with all 4 of them under contract, unless you're planning to play 2 up top, which I can't really see.
No, me neither on either point, sadly, because you it's interesting. It's the first time actually you read that list, and I was thinking, wow, yeah, as a striking department for a Championship side, that's pretty impressive, particularly one that's not just come down from the Premier League. And Sargent, I think, again, probably similarly to Gabriel Sara, if after what he did last season, he isn't attracting interest, I think you'd probably be questioning some recruitment teams and some recruitment departments out there. The one thing that I think might help Norwich is his injury history is a little bit. He's got this really concerning sort of ankle thing that he's been persisting with since he came back, really, which is not necessarily ideal. Adam Eder is really interesting. Again, there's still speculation around Celtic coming in for him permanently, and I think if the numbers got to a level that Norwich deemed acceptable, I think he would go. And
it was Celtic who was on loan last season.
Yes. And he was interesting. Brendan Rodgers kind of credited him as being the catalyst as to why they went and they were sort of neck and neck with Rangers at one stage, wasn't there? And there's real doubt over whether they'd win the title. And I think Brendan Rodgers basically said it was Eder and his impact that meant that they went on to do the Scottish Cup, the Scottish Domestic Double Cup and League, and he scored a last-minute winner against Rangers. So that in itself is enough. But 9 goals, it feels like it was almost an Adam Eder that we didn't see at Norwich, and he spoke about it a few times. I think that fresh scenery probably helped him out a lot. But whether he would now want to come back to Norwich City and compete with Josh Sargent after the loan spell that he's had, I don't know. But it was interesting. Thorup was asked about him, and said that he wanted to have a look in pre-season, really likes his profile, as everyone does. He's got 4 years left on his contract. He's an academy prospect. I think if he stayed at the club, I don't think anyone at Norwich City would be disappointed, but it feels like that's probably unlikely at the moment. And Ashley Barnes, who is a really interesting one because he played a very different role in the Vincent Kompany promotion winning team at Burnley, and he was almost a false nine, wasn't he, with pace running off him. And that's probably not how Thorup's going to play and how he's going to sort of line his team up. But I think he probably still does have a role to play. And quite frankly, I'm not quite sure where else he would go at this stage of his career on the money that he's on, and he's got a year left. So I think there's probably a different way that Norwich can use him to see out games, to close out games in certain conditions, and his experience. And we've spoken about it, those players, and getting them on board. He's a brilliant professional by all accounts. He's really popular by coaches and players. And if Norwich are going to go for a younger group, then having people like him in and around it, I don't think is the worst thing in the world. But I don't expect him to play probably as prominent a role as he did last season. And then Kenneth, again, probably similar to Abu Kamara last summer, you're looking at and probably feeling that it would be good for him if they could get him out on loan to a good League One club that almost try and go and replicate what Kamara did this season. Because if he can do that, then again, you come back to Norwich next summer and your possibilities then are much improved. At the moment, with, to be frank, with Eder and Sargent ahead of him, he's not going to, and Barnes as well, he's not going to break into that free, I don't think, at this stage, unless obviously one or more of them go. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting striking department as it is. It probably won't stay that way, unfortunately, as once the window closes, because I think we could probably expect movement on one, but maybe even both of Sargent and Eder.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're not going to have 4 strikers competing for one slot, I don't think. In terms of the left-sided forward option, Borja Sainz, I'm really curious about, because he really impressed me in the second half of last season. Some of his deliveries were excellent. He scored a couple of bangers as well. Yeah, talk to me about Borja Sainz.
Yeah, again, I think he's someone, I don't want to say frustrated, I think that's a bit strong, but I'm with you. He's shown really exciting elements, scored some fantastic goals, contributed some real moments, but they have been moments. I think I'd like to see him deliver a little bit more consistently. And I think that, again, and there's inevitably comparisons to Buendia. He's not as good as Emi Buendia. He's a very different player, but there are similarities in terms of, Buendia had a season or so where, although I think he recorded significantly more probably assists than Borja Sainz did, probably this feeling that Buendia had at the point where almost just needs to be unlocked. And I think if you can do that, then there's a very, very exciting talent there. And, technically in a possession-based team, getting him in good areas of the pitch, he will score goals, he will impact games. So, yeah, I think he'd be my choice to start on that left. And then you've obviously got players like Onel Hernandez and whatnot who provide a little bit of depth in that position. So, I think it feels to me like we're probably looking at Sainz and Kamara maybe as the two, but providing obviously John Rowe goes on either side. But I think Norwich have got some really good options there. Fashnacht didn't have a great first season at Norwich, but he's someone that's played Champions League football, international football, really odd footballer in that he seems to do nothing and then score a goal, which is a great quality to have, but probably didn't hit the performance levels that he would like, and how he fits into this squad, I'm not quite sure. So yeah, they've got quite a few wide options, and it's quite a fluid sort of situation, but a lot of really exciting young talent in those wide areas, Rowe, Kamara, Sainz, as we mentioned. So yeah, I think that's pretty exciting.
I guess the one thing that stands out to me, Connor, is if we're saying Abu Kamara on the right is going to act a bit, if Johnny Rowe goes, obviously we don't know, but if Kamara's like an inside forward, if you like, with lots of freedom to attack those goal scoring areas, he can create, but we'll give him the freedom to pop up as a second striker at times, because he can also play up top. I'm wondering, does Borja Sainz take on more creative responsibility? Because what you don't want is 3 forwards trying to get into the same position, if you like. So for me, I think Borja Sainz needs to sort of cut inside, and then you've got Josh Sargent and Kamara sort of popping into those goal scoring areas.
No, yeah, I agree. And I think there's probably, and again, this is why, when we talk about makeup of the team, if they do go down the route and they invert a left back to almost become a third-sided centre back, they're going to need width on that side as well. So this is a really interesting point as well. So maybe then you're not quite looking at Borja Sainz in the same way on that side. So this is a really interesting sort of debate, I think. And I think Thorup will want runners on either side. Well, Sainz is definitely a runner, so then maybe it's about tweaking his role slightly. But again, I think if you keep him wide, like you say, you don't maybe get him in the areas that you would like to get him into, which is cutting in on that right foot and getting shots at goal, which is, Sheffield Wednesday, the Huddersfield, he scored some fantastic goals with his right foot cutting in. That feels like the area that you want to get him in. But like you say, you don't want both of your wider players sort of doing similar things. And also, if Norwich then invert on the left, then they're going to have a hell of a lot of space in their wide channel there on the right for oppositions to exploit. So
could Jakob Sorensen be the 6th? I mean, are we sleeping on that a little bit? Because he was actually, when he came in at Norwich City, he was billed as a 6. So
Yeah.
is there the world where he goes back to being a number 6 and you bring in another left back?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as well. He's funny because every time that an opening has come up in midfield, he's been needed in defence. So he's really struggled to. I think we've seen more of him at left back and centre back than we actually have in his natural position in midfield. He's neat and tidy in possession. He's Danish as well, and sometimes these things count. I don't know, but I think we probably need to see him a bit more in that position to really judge. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if that was something that Thorup looked to in pre-season, because, like you say, I think he has all of those capabilities to do that role. I think, particularly in a side that maybe isn't as athletic, maybe is the right term, as David Wagner probably wanted last season, because he's not someone that is going to get up and down. I think he is someone who's neat and tidy and quite positionally astute, but probably doesn't have the yard of pace that you want. So yeah, definitely, I think you could square that off, particularly if you've got a couple of runners in those midfield spots. And Sarah's a runner, Nunez is a runner, McLean is a runner, Gibbs is a runner. So yeah, there's definitely options in there if that was the route that you wanted to go down, I think.
So in terms of additions then, Connor, I think you might need a goalkeeper if Angus Gunn goes. You're going to need another right back to let Kellen Fisher go out on loan. You might need another left back if we're with the question marks over both Sorensen for the balance aspect and Montoya in terms of defensively. Might need another number 6 as well. And I think that's probably about it. Are we looking at about 3 or 4 additions, Connor, between now and the end of the window?
I think what we've mapped out, absolutely. Again, before you get into sort of major sales of players and whatnot, and Sargent going or Rowe going, but yeah, I think on the surface that feels about fair. I would say that's certainly what I've got in my head at the moment. But again, it can all change so quickly, can't it?
Yeah, certainly can. So expectations for Norwich this season. I guess it's kind of multi-pronged, this one, because you want to make stylistic, cultural, developmental progress and all those things. You want to try and be competitive and see if you can finish in the top 6 and challenge for promotion. So if we were to look at the results side, because I'm taking the other aspects as a given, what from a results point of view, what's the expectation for Norwich this season?
Yeah, I don't know is the honest question. I think I've told myself a few times I'm probably not going to say I think Norwich need to finish in this place in the table. I think what we need to see from Norwich is what you've mapped out there. I think we need to see a playing style that improves as the season goes on, and I'm probably prepared for a little bit more dips than maybe some people. I think that something that reconnects with fans, because that hasn't been at Carrow Road for a long time, really, probably since Daniel Farker left the club. Clear identity, use of young talent, cultural reset, all of the stuff we've discussed. And I think I'm probably looking for an end of the season that gives you hope that the season after they could then be in a position to go and do something tangible. But that being said, this is a team that finished in the top 6. And I mean, we've just mapped it out there. We're not talking about, 11 signings, 12 signings, 13 signings. I think we're talking about a squad that is at a better level than the one that Daniel Farker inherited in 2017, if we're making those comparisons. So it probably does feel to me, having said I was not going to do it, it probably feels to me that if Norwich could get themselves 10 or upwards in that sort of element, I think most fans would look at that and go, yeah, okay, that's pretty decent. Yeah. That being said, I don't think anything is really, obviously, providing they don't go down or end up in any sort of scrap. But I think as long as we see those boxes that I've mapped out get ticked, I think that could be deemed a successful season for Norwich. I think what the issue at Norwich has been for too long, the focus has been, let's just get to the Premier League. Don't worry about how you do it. We don't have processes to do it. Just win and make sure you get there. And I think this now needs to become about the how and the why rather than just about being outcome based.
Focus on the root, not the fruit.
Hang on, as a wise man once said.
Absolutely. What are the reasons to believe, Connor, that Norwich City can meet their ambitions this season and challenge for those playoff promotion spots?
Yeah, well, I think we've mapped it out, a squad that I think is exciting. I think there's a lot of young talent. I think it's there's some areas to fill, but I think there's a good balance to it at the moment. Highly rated young manager, new ideas, new playing style. hopefully a little bit more entertaining. Going to be, everyone's different, isn't it? It's like, food or music or whatever. I didn't really like the style of football that David Wagner was trying to implement. So I'm hopeful that what I'm going to see next season is a lot more aligned with what I personally enjoy. That doesn't mean that everyone does, but I think all of those reasons, coupled with obviously the American investment as well, I think all of those reasons add feeling for optimism. And to be honest, it's not. I mean, we're talking pre-kit release, which I think is going to come out today, the home shirt. So that could be an absolute stinker, and it could throw a real curveball in. But at the moment, it feels quite bizarre in that it almost feels like the sun's come up and we've got peace for a little while, and that hasn't felt the way in sort of the Norwich City sphere for a long period of time. So I think there is optimism at the moment. What that looks like and what it translates to in terms of the season, we'll see. But as we sit here today, I think there's a lot of hope about what Norwich City could be, not just next season, but in the next few years.
Sounds promising. Reasons for doubt?
It's a project, and there's people involved in and people don't like time in football, and things can go wrong. You can sell. All three of those players could go. They could recruit poorly, and they could find themselves in a really sticky situation as they were pre-Farker. So there's always I think the doubt is always, what if it doesn't work? And what if it doesn't work can be quite damaging, particularly at this level. So that's it. And obviously every season that they spend at this level gets harder, I think, to get out of because of the finances and whatnot. So that's the doubts, and maybe the young players not performing in the way that they would like, and all of that maybe translating to a pretty sticky, stodgy season with lots of defeats and not very much to cheer about. So that's probably maybe the worst case scenario, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, give me a number between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism for the season ahead.
7.
There you go. Simple as that. Listen, Connor, thanks so much for your insight. I really appreciate your time joining me this afternoon. Thanks to you for watching at home. This has been the Summer Deep Dive here on EFL Debate. Get yourself subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. Also get following the PinkUn.com. Some great Norwich City content coming up as well. And we'll see you again very soon.